Spring 1941. Hitler has ordered that Britain be allowed to wither on the vine, and that Germany is going to go after Russia. He is distracted by the war in North Africa to a degree. He is really distracted by the need to conquer the perceived need anyway, to conquer the Balkans, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Greece, and the island of Crete. And that significantly is going to delay anything he's going to do against Stalin. Hitler's troops had begun to see some of the things that Hitler's SS, the black shirts, were doing in newly conquered areas, especially in Poland. The regular German army witnessed what they could only perceive as bizarre war crimes against Poles and against Jews. Some of these officers began to try, they actually succeeded in stopping, at least temporarily, some of the actions of the SS against the Poles and particularly against the Jews. This attitude by the regular army is noted. So before Operation Barbarossa is going to take off, the invasion of Russia, Hitler calls his senior generals into a grand conference chamber. And they're all sitting, darkness falls, and the light's on Hitler, and he walks up to the podium and he says, "Officers, I know that you represent the great tradition of Zossen," that's Germany and before it Prussia's version of West Point, their military academy where the best generals are trained. I know that you represent knightly traditions that go back 1,000 years. I know all about the great glory of the German army. After all, I was in it. But what we're about to do is different than anything you've ever done before. We are going into a war of civilizations. What's on the line is the very survival of what he called Western civilization. We are going into Russia to fight communism, to build living space for Germans to expand eastward so that we can be economically self-sufficient. That's autarky. But we are also going east to eliminate a race enemy. We are going to engage in a kind of warfare the likes of which you've never seen. And it may disturb some of you. You've got to understand something. This is going to happen. This is what I want. These are my orders. If you think you're going to have a problem with it, you'd better find a way to deal with it. Because these orders will be followed and my political soldiers will not be interfered with. I hope I am making myself absolutely crystal clear. And he walks out. Hitler has just made it clear that the old rules of war will not apply to what is going to happen in Russia. And we'll talk about what happens in Russia in a while. On June 21st, 1941, Hitler's armies invade. Now, what is Stalin's response? Stalin, who has international communism behind him. Stalin, who has an intelligence service at least as good as the Germans, probably better. Stalin, who has spies everywhere. Stalin, who doesn't trust anyone. Stalin has been getting reports for months from his own intelligence people and from the British that the Germans are moving east. They're moving towards us. When questioned about it, the German ambassador says, "Oh, it's just military maneuvers. We want to do it out of the range of the British so they don't see what we're doing." And the Russians say, "Okay." Stalin actually orders people gulagged for insisting that the Germans are coming east because he's convinced they're trying to make a war, fabricate a war between Germany and Russia. When the Germans invade, Stalin hides in his bedroom for a few days. He doesn't come out. He doesn't want to be seen by anyone because he's afraid that as the man who insisted that the Russian army not mobilize, that no action be taken as German scout planes were overflying Russian positions, taking picture after picture, that you could see German tank armies massing on the Polish plains. Stalin ordered all information about this to be suppressed because he didn't want anything. In fact, he increased shipments to Germany. The agreement between Hitler and Stalin caused a lot of Russian raw materials to be shipped westward to the Germans. Now, why was Stalin so unwilling to accept that Hitler was about to betray him? Trust me, it's not because Stalin couldn't imagine being betrayed by his bestest buddy Adolf. When you become the leader of a totalitarian society, you do so as a self-made man. Your judgment is in a crucible of Darwinian survival. You have to trust your judgment, not the experts, not conventional wisdom. Your judgment is constantly being tested, and it's constantly on the line. And both Stalin and Hitler were men whose judgment had ended up being much more successful than anyone else predicted. They rose higher and became more powerful than anyone else could have imagined because they took chances and they trusted their instincts. Now, Hitler was an artist at heart. Whingy, complainy, moody, isolated, very lazy. Stalin, on the other hand, was a workhorse. He was a mule. He out-organized his more brilliant and well-respected opponents again and again. He outworked them. He out-brutalized them. Stalin could never imagine anyone in Hitler's position coming after the Soviet Union while Britain remained in the war. Stalin would never have done that. Stalin, who was familiar with Hitler's book Mein Kampf and was familiar enough through his spy agency to know what Hitler was like, knew that Hitler absolutely refused to consider the idea of a two-front war. And now the thought that Hitler would leave an intact British Empire at his back when he came after Russia, that's insane. Stalin assumed that no one in Hitler's position would do that. Consequently, he wanted to make darn sure that anyone who was trying to foment a war between him and Adolf would fail. So he blinded himself, he closed his eyes, he went, nim, 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 and he kept the agreement. Within the hour of the German attack, Russian trains were still heading westward, filled with oil and grain and other supplies the Germans wanted. In the initial attacks, the Germans conquered vast amounts of Russian territory. German armies cut through, looking for my red marker, the Russian border defenses. And they surround over 1 million men in various pockets. They advance more quickly than anyone suspected the Germans could. Remember, Russia is so much, European Russia is bigger than the rest of Europe on land. Because they were forbidden from taking any preventative steps, the Russian armies on the frontier are effectively all destroyed within months. Now, here's Moscow. Moscow was likely the target. That's what Napoleon went after. Moscow is the capital of Russia. But as the armies then move towards Moscow, they've moved outward in a triangle, now they're moving inward towards Moscow. September is becoming October in Russia. And as the Germans pass through Vyazma, one of the suburbs of Moscow, and as German commanders can see the tops of the onion domes of the Kremlin, as they get within 20 miles of Moscow, a cold front hits that freezes literally everything in the German army solid. They don't have winter weight antifreeze. They didn't bring winter gear because Hitler assumed he could conquer Russia in one season. Throughout Germany, women are begged, donate your furs, donate your minks, donate your woolen clothing. Men too, donate them to needy soldiers at the front because the Germans did not send winter clothing or winter weight antifreeze or engine parts into Russia. The German army freezes outside of Moscow. And as the attacks come to a halt, new Siberian armies hit the Germans from the flanks and drive, I'm going to have to use a different color, and drive them westward, back about 200 miles. So the Russians actually pushed the Germans back. The Germans were stopped, though, not by the Siberians and not by the new Russian T-34 tank. The Germans were stopped by General Winter. Had the Germans not gone into Yugoslavia, had they not gone into the Balkans for 6 to 8 weeks, they would have reached and taken Moscow before all of that happened. Now, after this attack fails, Hitler plays a game of sour grapes about Moscow. Oh, it's not about Moscow. It's about economics. And next year's battle plan is going to focus on getting oil from near the Caspian Sea down in this direction. He's aggressively not going to go after Moscow. He's going to go after Leningrad. He's going to go after the Crimea. He's going to go after the oil. He's going to just avoid Moscow entirely because, oh, Moscow doesn't important. It's just a capital city. Look, in Napoleonic times, Moscow didn't matter. It was just a capital city. But in an industrial time period, Moscow is the center of all Russian communication. Moscow is the center of all the Russian rail networks. Moscow is the center of all Russian industry, Russian government, Russian police power. If Stalin had lost Moscow, the likelihood is somebody would have put a bullet in his brain and Germany might have won. But Hitler's decision to go after the Yugoslavs in such a big way, and Greece and Crete, delays things to such an extent that Hitler is not able to conquer Russia in a single season, if it was ever possible. But he's not even able to take Moscow. He never takes Moscow. And the fact that he didn't send winter gear into Russia is just a sign of profound hubris. Up until now, he's been dealing with European-style states. But Russia is so much more vast. It is so much bigger than that. It just boggles his mind as it boggled Napoleon's mind. But his vainglorious and arrogant refusal to admit how important Moscow was really is an advantage to the Allies. Thank God he had this blindness. This and so many other things. So, we are going to leave the European war there with the Germans approaching Moscow and being pushed back in the winter of 1941-42. And we will resume our story after we go to the Pacific and talk about the turning point battles of World War II.